Our first scripture is Genesis chapter 45, verses 3 through 11 and 15. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, so dismayed were they at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me." And they came closer. He said, "I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in these lands these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. You shall settle in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, as well as your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. I will provide for you there, since there are 5 more years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have will not come to poverty.' And he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them, and after that his brothers talked with him." This ends the reading of the first scripture.
So last week, we started with Jesus' Sermon on the Plain. And I talked a little bit about how right before then, Jesus had actually gathered the disciples, including Simon, Peter, and he took them out he went out on the boat with them, and he said to Simon Peter, "Let's go out to the deeper waters." And that's such a reflection on this sermon. And today, it goes even deeper. So this is Luke chapter 6, verses 27 through 38. "But I say to you that listen, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you. And if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask them for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies, do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So there's a phrase that I often use when I'm trying to describe the experience of living, the experience of being in this world. And that phrase is the fabric of existence. I love that phrase. It's a metaphor that compares the nature of woven fabric as a description of the nature of our existence. So fabric is woven by taking different types of thread and intersecting them at right angles. So a weaver strings a set of threads vertically along a loom, and then those threads they're called the warp. And then the weaver runs a thread over and under the warp horizontally, and that's called the warp or the woof. So the warp and the woof and the various types of threads all together create these intricate fabrics. They're all unique. Some are strong and rough textured. Some are delicate and silky. Some are vibrant and colorful. Some are soft and warm. And when I use this metaphor, the fabric of existence, I'm trying to suggest that each person's existence is constructed out of the weaving together of different experiences, such that it creates a unique, unrepeatable pattern. In other words, a person's experience of this life is embedded in an intersection of diverse experiences, good and bad, joy and sorrow, loss and gain, clarity and confusion, all of them woven together. It's a metaphor that I think is really helpful in understanding the biblical narrative as well, particularly this story about this family of Jacob, or Israel as he is later called. The passage that Maggie read from Genesis is a section from a larger story about Joseph and his brothers. Joseph and his brothers are the 12 siblings that represent the 12 tribes of Israel. Together, they represent God's covenant people who are to become light for all the world. But there's a conflict between them. So I'm going to summarize the story. Joseph is Jacob's favorite son. He also has this gift of insight. He's very charming. The other brothers are so jealous of the favoritism that Jacob shows him that they plot to kill him. But instead of killing him, one of the brothers convinces the others that they should just throw him into an empty well, and so they do that. But then they decide that they're going to sell him off as a slave. And this is the beginning of several years of bad luck for Joseph. He's then falsely accused of an offense, and he's sent to jail. And here he gets this reputation for being able to interpret dreams, and this gets the attention of the Pharaoh. And for 2 years, the Pharaoh has been haunted by a dream that about seven fat cows that are eaten by 7 skinny cows. And this dream, Joseph says, is a warning, he tells the Pharaoh, that a famine is coming. So Pharaoh puts Joseph in charge of the grain stores, which he manages so well that he prevents widespread starvation. If you want to see this story, one of the best interpretations is VeggieTales. It's titled Little Joe and the Veggie-Colored Coat. I highly recommend it. So at this point in the story, Joseph's brothers travel to Egypt. Now, there's starvation across the land. And so Joseph's brothers are facing starvation. And so they travel to Egypt to plead for food, because this is where the store of food is. And this leads them to this man who is in charge of the store of food to make their request, and they do not realize that this man is the brother whom they had betrayed so long ago. And now that Joseph holds all the power, how is he going to respond? The conflict between the brothers is this corrosive thread. It threatens their existence. Joseph almost dies as a consequence of his brother's anger, and now their lives hang in the balance. As modern people, we know what it means when conflict grows from small offenses into an existential threat. We are a post-nuclear generation. We live in a time when conflict could literally mean the end of the world. And over the past 10 years or so, we have witnessed clashes of interest blossom and grow into utter destabilizing distrust. And all of this is a heavy burden on our weakened institutions, leaving us to wonder, will they hold? We understand, just as in the story of Joseph and his brothers, what it means when conflict grows so large that they threaten all that we hold dear. And yet at the same time that we are living with these conflicts that are becoming an existential threat, that create in us such a sense of isolation and resentment, forgiveness as an option seems to be off the table. It is just not considered viable. Why? Because forgiveness seems to present to us more of a threat to the self than conflict does. People believe that if they forgive, they surrender all of their defenses. To forgive is equated with giving up all righteous objection to the offense. I'm not sure that we have a solid understanding of what it means to forgive. And so I want to share the story of Eva Kor. Eva Kor was born in 1934 in Romania. When she was 10 years old, she and her family were loaded onto cattle cars and taken to Auschwitz. Everyone in her family was killed, but Eva and her twin sister Miriam survived. This is her story, told in her own words. She said, "During our time in Auschwitz, we talked very little. Starved for food and human kindness, it took every ounce of strength just to stay alive. Because we were twins, we were used in a variety of experiments. 3 times a week, we'd be placed naked in a room for 6 to 8 hours to be measured and studied. It was unbelievably demeaning. In another type of experiment, they took blood from one arm and gave us injections in the other. After one such injection, I became very ill and was taken to the hospital. Dr. Mengele came in the next day, looked at my fever chart, and declared that I had only 2 weeks to live. For 2 weeks, I was between life and death, but I refused to die. If I had died, Mengele would have given Miriam a lethal injection in order to do a double autopsy. When I didn't die, he carried on experimenting with us, and as a result, Miriam's kidneys stopped growing. They remained the size of a child's all her life." On the 27th of January, 1945, 4 days before my 11th birthday, Auschwitz was liberated by the Soviet army. After 9 months in refugee camps, I returned to my village in Romania to find that no one from my family had survived. Echoes from Auschwitz were a part of my life, but I did not speak publicly about my experiences until 1978, after the television series The Holocaust was aired. People would ask me about the experiments, but I couldn't remember very much, so I wanted to talk to other twins who were liberated with me. I wrote to newspapers asking them to publish an appeal with other survivors of Mengele to contact me. By 1980, I was sending out 500 letters a year, but still no response. In desperation, one day, I decided to start an organization in which I would make myself the president. People are always impressed when they get a letter from a president, and it worked. Finally, I was able to find other twin survivors and exchange memories. It was an immensely healing experience. In 1993, I was invited to lecture to some doctors in Boston and was asked if I could bring a Nazi doctor with me. I thought it was a mad request until I remembered that I once had been in a documentary which had also featured Dr. Hans Munch of Auschwitz. I contacted him in Germany, and he said he would meet with me for a videotaped interview to take to the conference. In July 1993, I was on my way to meet this Nazi doctor. I was so scared, but when I arrived at his home, he treated me with the utmost respect. I asked him if he had seen the gas chambers. He said it was a nightmare he dealt with every single day of his life. I was surprised that Nazis had nightmares too, and asked him if he would come with me to Auschwitz to sign a document at the ruins of the gas chambers. He said he would love to do it. In my desperate effort to find a meaningful thank you gift for Dr. Munch, I searched the stores and my heart for many months. Then the idea of a forgiveness letter came to mind. I knew it would be a meaningful gift, but it became a gift to myself as well, because I realized I was not a hopeless, powerless victim. When I asked a friend to check my spelling, she challenged me to forgive Dr. Mengele too. At first I was adamant that I could never forgive Dr. Mengele, but then I realized I had that power now, the power to forgive. It was my right to use it. No one could take it away. On the 27th of January, 1995, at the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, I stood in the ruins of the gas chamber with my children and with Dr. Munch and his children and grandchildren. Dr. Munch signed his document about the operation of the gas chamber while I read my document of forgiveness and signed it. As I did that, I felt a burden of pain was lifted from me. I was no longer in the grip of hate. I was finally free. The day I forgave the Nazis, privately, I forgave my parents, whom I had hated all my life for not having saved me from Auschwitz. Children expect their parents to protect them. Mine couldn't. And then I forgave myself for hating my parents. For most people, there is a big obstacle to forgiveness because society expects revenge. It seems we need to honor our victims, but I always wonder if my dead loved ones would want me to live with pain and anger until the end of my life. Some survivors do not want to let go of the pain. They call me a traitor and accuse me of talking in their name. I have never done this. Forgiveness is as personal as chemotherapy. I do it for myself. And so from Eva's story, I take a few lessons about forgiveness. First, forgiveness is the right that belongs to the victim and no one else. If someone is harmed, it is within their power to forgive if they choose to. No one can tell them that they should do it, or that God expects it of them, or that they owe it to themselves or others. And no one can forgive on behalf of another. Not the courts, not the families, not society in general. This also means that forgiveness does not depend on the perpetrator's remorse. If it did, then the perpetrator would hold all the power. The perpetrator would decide whether or not the victim would experience the freedom that forgiveness has to offer. If a victim chooses to forgive, it has very little to do with the character, the understanding, the behavior of the perpetrator. Forgiveness belongs to the victim alone. The other thing is, forgiveness is not the same thing as reconciliation. Reconciliation is actively working out an agreement between two or more parties that allows everyone to move forward. Reconciliation does not require forgiveness, but it does require understanding. Reconciliation is communal. It's a group activity with witnesses. It involves listening and speaking and often requires acts of contrition. But forgiveness, on the other hand, is personal. It's internal. It occurs within. It doesn't require announcements or agreements or conditions. Finally, forgiveness isn't forgetting. Sometimes I hear people say, I can forgive, but I can't forget. And I think, I don't even understand that. Forgiveness is acceptance. To forgive somebody doesn't mean to say, you know, what you did is water under the bridge. The slate is wiped clean. It's as if it didn't happen. That's not forgiveness. That's avoidance. Forgiveness is saying, this horrible thing that you did happened. I accept that it happened and all the pain that it caused. And in my acceptance, I can see both the consequences that I have suffered and the humanity of the one who perpetrated it against me. And that is why we resist forgiveness. Because to accept pain is very hard, especially when it is thrust upon us without any fault of our own. Joseph said to his brothers, I accept what you did. And in accepting it, I see that there is more to the story. I see that God took the thing that you did, awful as it was, and used it for life. And because God took something so awful and made it part of something good, I want to add my contribution of forgiveness to the story. And this answers the inevitable question of why we would forgive. We forgive because of what it does to the fabric of our existence. It weaves a golden thread through it, right next to the dark threads of injustice. Forgiveness lends beauty and grace to the world. It is a shining star of a generation, a sign of hope that there is more divinity within us than we realized. Forgiveness does not mean happily ever after. But forgiveness brings light to the darkness of the world. In the reading from Luke, Jesus says to his disciples, do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put in your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back. For Luke, forgiveness, judgment, condemnation, and goodness, all of these make up the environment in which we live and move and have our being. As we learn to weave the threads of forgiveness into our story, the fabric of our existence changes. Its beauty becomes our beauty. The grace of our forgiveness, that which it bestows on our enemy, is the grace that we find for ourselves because it is ourselves. If we condemn our enemies, we must live with that condemnation too. If we harm another, that harm is our constant companion. And we often think of forgiveness as an all-or-nothing proposition. In other words, if we couldn't forgive a person for killing somebody we love, then there's no value to be gained for forgiving the driver who cut us off in traffic. We just throw up our hands and say it's too hard. But if, instead, we think of forgiveness as a spiritual or moral exercise, one that we practice regularly so we might get better at it, it becomes much more available to us. I might not be able to forgive a person for stalking me online because they find women preachers to be an affront to God. But I can forgive the woman who told me that she preferred a male chaplain when I come to visit her in the hospital. Just because I can't do the one doesn't nullify the other. That would be like saying that there's no value in going to the gym if you can't lift 100 pounds overhead on the first visit. Forgiveness is a practice, and the more we do it, the stronger we get at it. Jesus' command to forgive your enemy may seem to be beyond what you or I are capable of. But it is a path that is available to all. Whether we or not we take that path up is up to us alone. Amen.